I have a question for you. How do you get someone who denies that truth exists to shift their position from one thing to another? How do you get them to believe something? How do you transfer knowledge? How do you craft an argument that is persuasive? That's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into the episode. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the TLDR Christianity podcast, where we like to make big ideas easy to pick up. That's our goal here. That's what we try and do. Now, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to our Patreon or our Give, Send, Go linked below. The choice is yours. I like Give, Send, Go. Patreon does allow for more feedback back and forth between audience members and myself, but whatever you do, don't do it on an iPhone because they charge extra. That is not in any sort of way a required thing. That really is if you want to support the podcast. Big if on there. I'm not demanding that. The podcast material is perfectly free. Now, what are we talking about today? We're talking about the question of how do you persuade people in a post-truth world? Because where we're at, I'm going to try and make this as simple as possible to hopefully be helpful, but we're in a state where we've moved from the idea. Now, this is something that, an older episode, I think all the way back in the Wikipedia podcast days, had Bill Roach on, Dr. Bill Roach, and he really broke it down from a philosophical level. And we talked about just the different views of truth and the stage that we're currently at. But we've gone from truth exists and there is objective truth. There's truth that's true for all people at all times in all places. That it's true regardless of circumstance. There is objective truth and we can know about it. We went from that to the modernist era where truth exists, we just can't know it. We can't know about this absolute truth. And really it comes down to humanity to define most things. Now, there's truth found in nature, and we're going out and we're collecting that. That was the era of science, the era of evolution. Now we've moved beyond that into a post-truth society. That's your truth, but my truth says, and it explains a lot of why we're seeing some of the nonsense we're seeing. It can be hard for some people to look out and go, how are people getting to the point where they're denying the existence of male and female? Or they're saying that a man can become a woman. Well, because they have no truth, they're attached to nothing. Truth is 100% subjective. Whatever you feel is true is completely valid truth. It is as strong as truth can get. Now, when you have that, when you have people's feelings, opinions are now hard truth, the hardest possible truth in their system, you can understand why we're in a crazy world. But we know from the Bible that there is universal truth. There's these absolute truths that exist outside of humanity and even exist outside of this physical creation. They are rooted and found in God. So we're fighting something that is radically 180 degrees opposite of Christianity. So a tiny bit about what we're going to be doing. This is the start of a sort of a mini series. It's not going to be like officially labeled, but we're going to go through different concepts like this. We're going to ask certain questions because if we're going to engage with and defeat errors, particularly the types of errors we're seeing currently that are rooted in these types of post-truth, postmodern philosophies, we're going to need to have a grounding and understanding of the battlefield. What are the things going on? How can we actually maneuver and fight? So that's why I want to talk about how do we engage in a post-truth society. I'm going to finish laying that out quickly, then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So if you just want to get the quicker definition, yeah, I'm going to give that, finish it, and then we'll talk in depth. I really hope you stick around for the greater part. This is going to be a little bit of a test run for the format for these little episodes that we're going to be doing. So let me know your feedback. Let me know your feedback. But again, post-truth. Post-truth. In a society where anything can be true, how do you interact? How do you interact? How do you, and this is the biggest thing for us as Christians, the number one question is, how do you evangelize? How do you preach the gospel? Now, obviously, the basic component doesn't change. We go out there, we find people, and we tell them about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We tell them about sin and death. We tell them about the fall, what humanity, what we have done, how Jesus has solved those problems. He paid the price for sins. He rose from the dead, conquering our biggest enemies of sin and death. He ascended. He's going to return. There's going to be a recreation, a new creation. There has been a way paved back to Christ for fallen humanity. That doesn't alter at all. Now we can talk about more specific tactics. How do you communicate that? Communicate that to someone where you could say the words and they will be just meaningless. Post-truth, we're also post-Christian. How do you get across these certain themes? How do you get them to understand different ideas when they fundamentally deny them? The biggest thing is you're going to need to understand that. You're going to need to understand that when you're talking with someone, you're not intellectually persuading them. I think even in evangelism over the past, however long you want to put on it, 20, 30 years, there was a resurgence within the church of intellectualism, of knowledge, of learning about doctrine and truth and philosophy and all these other things, which was phenomenal for a lot of reasons, caused some certain problems, and also got hijacked by a lot of different groups as well. I mean, you can see that in places like the Gospel Coalition. Tim Keller crafted his whole shtick around sounding intellectual and appealing to that. And then so the Gospel Coalition was an outworking of this. You know, we're going to present things we're going to stand above the chaos, the noise of the world, and we're going to show an intellectual Christianity, one rooted in truth and can be articulated. Its doctrines are known. All these things are figured out. Well, at the same time, they were injecting all sorts of problematic ideas at the same time. There was good, but there was bad. Drip-fed poison. We saw the fruits of that. 2020 exposed all over the place, and it's just continued on from there. That there's been ideological drifts within the American church. Now, we've covered that in much more detail. But you're not going to be able to evangelize by convincing people of these doctrinal truths. You're not going to just be able to go, here's a set of truths, and you should believe it. Now, in the end, it's the work of the Holy Spirit, not us. So nothing we do is going to save someone. Nothing we do is going to prevent someone from being saved. Now, what we're talking about is being an effective tool. We're tools for the work of proclaiming the gospel. I would rather be an effective tool. I'd rather be a sharp tool, a tool ready to be used for its intended purpose, than one that is blunt. Now, the thing is, again, God at work, not us. But when you're a blunt tool, it's not effective. God will still get the work done, but who gets hurt in the situation? Well, it's the blunt tool. The blunt tool gets damaged. I don't want to be a blunt tool. I don't want to be a rusty tool. I want to be a tool that has engaged with other believers. I want to be a tool that has scraped that rust off, has gotten sharp. Iron sharpens iron. I want to be effective. So when you're communicating in a post-truth culture, well, the problem is people will go to the other extreme of, well, if intellectual isn't going to work, then we need to be emotional. We need to appeal to the emotional side. Well, that's wrong too. It's not about appealing. What you're doing is not appealing. What you're doing is trying to communicate the truths of the gospel. How do you do that? How do you do that to someone who, whether knowingly or unknowingly, denies truth? How do you get over that hurdle? And it really comes down to, with most things, first, number one, observation. You have to understand the person so that you can communicate to them. Where are they at? What are the words that they understand? I'm talking in a knowledge sort of way. What words does this person know? What words? If I drop propitiation, most people in the church are still going to be confused about what propitiation means. So, choosing your words wisely. I need to choose words that this person can understand. But beyond that, you're going to have to engage. Well, it's what Paul does on Mars Hill. That's the way that you need to engage. He saw a crossover point, a way that he could get a conversation started. Hey, here's this observation I made about you. And it's a simple observation. We can agree on this observation. And, you're very religious people. And you even have a shrine to an unknown God. And I'm here to proclaim that unknown God. Then what does he do? He, in a very tactful way, no, it's not lacking any sort of direct, like it's very direct, but in a very tactful way, he goes through telling them why their worldview is fundamentally flawed and how that God, unknown God, is something radically different. He tears down their worldview in a very wonderful way, and it causes many to scoff, but some to listen. Now, that's the important thing. In a post-truth society, we're never going to capture, you're not just going to be able to cast out a net and catch a large group of people. You're going to have many, many, many people just be reactionary, scoff, and walk away. You're not there to try and persuade, to convince. You're there to cast that net out and hopefully snag a few people that you can then continue conversation with. You have to find those points of connection. How can I get you to understand these truths? These truths. Pastor friend of mine has told the story many times. I don't know where he got it, so I can't, attribute further than that. But it's a story of some missionaries that had made contact with a tribe and were, deciphered their language and were trying to preach the gospel. And I think they showed, if I remember the story correctly, they showed the Jesus film, which we're not going to talk about that positive or negative. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? That's not the point of this story. And they noticed something very strange, that the people watching, because they translated in their language, people watching cheered for Judas when he betrayed Jesus and laughed and mocked the betrayed Jesus. And they're just like, what's going on? Why are they cheering for the bad guy? Well, come to find out, in that tribe's culture, um, that was seen as a good thing. Deceit that achieves victory, deceit that achieves the desired outcome, is considered good. You won. It was really, it comes down to ends justify the means, but then it caused a struggle. Like, well, they're not understanding this at all. How do we get past that? How do we get them to understand the truth of the gospel? Because they showed them the film, they preached the gospel to them, they've done all these things, and they just cannot get these people to understand it. Then they witness this exchange take place between this tribe and another tribe, and they exchanged these two children. They're, the missionaries are now the confused ones, and they ask and they learn, oh, well, this is a peace child, that the tribe will send a child to that other tribe to secure peace. They send, it's a hostage. This is a very common thing historically. You send, because then you won't attack them, they won't attack you, because if you attack them, they'll kill your child. You attack, they'll kill yours. But they went on about the peace, and they had a great deal of respect for the peace child, because the system had kept the peace. And one of the missionaries goes, I got it. Jesus, they knew all these pieces now. They knew all the gospel, so they didn't have to. They just went, Jesus, he's God's peace child to us. Light bulb clicks. And the members of the tribe suddenly get it. And they realize that Judas, going through, they realize that Judas wasn't the good guy. Judas betrayed the peace child. Judas risked war. God made peace with us through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He was the peace child sent by God, and they just get it. That is it. They used all the words correctly, but could not break through to these people culturally. So you do need to understand that. And that really comes down to it. You need to be observant when engaging with post-truth people that deny truth. How can I understand your culture enough to go beyond just simply saying words at you, to actually communicate effectively the ideas, the correct ideas of the gospel? I'm not appealing to you. I'm not trying to appeal to your emotion or appeal to your I'm trying to communicate this to you in a way that you understand the accurate, truthful information of the gospel. I'm trying to take you from the point where you think Judas is the good guy to the point where you go, oh, this is Christ. This is what Christ did for us. This is what God did for us. And again, with a post-truth people, that is going to take a massive amount of effort. Massive amount of patience. It's going to vary from person to person, but you're going to need to understand the mountain that you're climbing before you begin the climb. And that really comes down to it. It's in a post-truth society, communication really becomes cultural. So you're going to need to understand the culture that you're trying to communicate with. And no, that is not terminology. Oh man, I'm going to reach the Gen Z kids, or the, now we're into Gen Alpha kids. Oh man. Hey, did you guys see that famous movie? It was based. Man. Oh, did you see how he yeeted that thing? Oh yeah. No. Sometimes it's useful to understand a subculture's terminology, but you need to go beyond that. You're not understanding their terminology. You're understanding their view of reality. Again, in a post-truth world, that can become a lot messier because you're going to have to understand that individual person's view of truth. So it becomes a lot more individualized. Now, the lucky thing is, no one can actually operate that way. So you're going to find groups of people that all believe the same thing. That's very common. So you take that, you go, okay, here's this belief system that they have. And here's how that particular person expresses that belief system. Now, how do I wedge the gospel into that in a way that it divides their system? Again, Paul, very tactfully, I'm going to tear down your belief system, your view of reality, show why it's wrong, and start to preach the truth of God's gospel, what he has done, what Christ has done for us. And that would it come down to. And again, that's also going to be outside of evangelism. That's just communicating in a post-truth society in general. Now, let's dive in a little bit more, because let's talk about some of the challenges communicating in a post-truth society. And again, this is about positive things like, how do I communicate things like the gospel with someone, or just communicate in general? But also, how do I refute error? Because for much as you think, oh, I'm not influenced by this society, or people around me in my church, they're not influenced by it. Yes, they are. All of us are. Oh, no. You don't understand, Kyle. Yeah, that's for the younger kids. It's for the younger generations. But I'm a boomer, or even Gen X, or even older millennials will probably say the same thing at this point. But hey, no, it doesn't matter. This stuff was already, our march away from truth. There's not a single person alive right now that was born before that march had really been on the move. Yes, different phase of the walking away from truth. In the height of the modernist era, the era of evolution, of facts derived through human reason. Human reason detached from any sort of objectivity. So no wonder it collapses into a post-truth society. When you're trying to just get things through human reasoning, you can't even validate human reasoning. It's going to collapse in on itself. Also, we'll talk about, it was the era of atheism. Well, atheism is always going to collapse into paganism. It can't not. People cannot exist in an atheistic state in perpetuity. We looked at this a while ago. Humanist Manifesto #1 was explicit about that, and about setting up secular humanism, atheistic evolutionary beliefs, setting up secular humanism as the evolution of religion, and not even replacing religion. It is the new religion, the evolved religion. They knew that they needed to give people that. Failed. Now we're in a neo-pagan society. But it's important to understand how people behave and doubt things. Now, broadly speaking, doubt can be put into 3 larger categories, which is intellectual, volitional, and emotional. Now, if you're an intellectual doubter, which, spoiler, very few people are. If you think that you're I question things intellectually, you're probably not. And that's not to say you're not a smart person, you're not a intelligent, be able to sift through things, check data, and change your beliefs. But most of us default to emotion. Spoiler alert. But people that are intellectual doubters, they are data driven. If they see information that proves their belief wrong, well, they will change. They will change and adapt. And this is not that's not trust the science. That's not, oh, well, this is what we think now, but then it changed late. No, no, no. It's more solid than that. Then there's volitional, which is still a minority compared to the biggest category of emotion. But these are the people that doubt via willpower, volition, will. These are people that look at something and refuse to believe it just because they don't want to. You can give them intellectual reasons, they'll toss that aside. Emotional things, they'll toss that aside. They're going to look at you and go, nope, I don't want to believe it. I will not believe it. Their doubt is rooted in their own willpower. That's very difficult to overcome. Very difficult to overcome because there's no answer you can give them. Their will must be broken. Must be broken. I'd argue that's Paul's an example of this. Now, yes, Jesus appeared to him. There's this proof aspect of things, but I think that the arrogance of Paul needed to be broken. And read the story of his conversion. It is very taking him down a notch. It is breaking that arrogance. And you can read Paul's whole journey afterwards. You see the developing more and more of a humbler and humbler man, going from having such a sharp dispute with Barnabas, which that's the thing, such a sharp dispute that they go separate ways. Now, God used that for good, and eventually Paul would say, send Mark, because the dispute, if you don't know, the dispute was over Mark. Mark had left on their previous journey. Barnabas wanted to give him another chance. Barnabas, the guy that brought Paul into the gathering when no one else would, when they were afraid of him. That's just who Barnabas was. Paul, not realizing that he was about to do something very hypocritical, said, no, we're not bringing him along because he abandoned us. Oops. You got a little bit of a pot calling the kettle black situation there. But eventually, you read Paul saying, send Mark to me, for I have need for him. They were reconciled. You have this journey that Paul goes on. And again, it comes down to that will, that stubbornness, that arrogance that needed to be broken in Paul. But that's a type of doubt. It's very hard to overcome because, again, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing to even overcome. It's the person themselves. It's not information or emotion. It's the person. You ever tried to argue with a person that just roots, where you are arguing against the person? It's not someone else. It's him. That's who you're arguing against. And you're just like, nothing I can say to you will get you to admit you're very obviously wrong in this situation. Will is hard to overcome. But then there's emotional doubters. People that are driven by their emotion. Their reason for rejecting something is rooted in emotion. How do you overcome that? That can be very, very difficult, but it's not impossible. Very similar to, in the intellectual case, you answer the intellectual objection and you can get them over that. In the emotional case, you answer the emotional objection and you can get them over that. The problem is, what do you do about will? Well, we spent a century plus. I'd really argue the 20th century was where it was about the common man, teaching the average person that you are an intellectual. Everyone can be an intellectual. Everyone has intellectual reasons why they reject, in this case specifically, why they reject Christianity. You could not be intellectual if you believed in Christianity. And it caused this divide. Now, you take people who are emotional doubters, they have emotional reasons why they're rejecting Christianity, and you tell them that they are intellectual doubters. Well, what do you do? Which one is true? Well, you'd say, oh, well, you have to get over the intellectual objections in order to uh, tackle what's going on. Well, no, because the objections they actually have are emotional. So nothing you can say here in the intellectual space is going to answer them. So, okay, well, you answer the emotional objections. Well, no, because they feel that they're justified intellectually. What happens in this situation is you took an an emotional doubter and turned them into a volitional doubter. Because no longer can you address the emotional, because they will deflect it and say, no, I have intellectual reasons. But they don't have intellectual reasons. Don't exist. So where does that leave them? It's now their willpower that is maintaining their doubt, that is maintaining their objections. So that, again, this is something very critical to understand. If we're trying to talk to post-truth people, we got to understand that you are going to be going up against their own willpower. They're going to reject you because they desire to reject you. They're going to reject Christ because they desire to reject Christ. How do you overcome that, even in communication? It's an uphill battle. So let's change the question a tiny bit. How do we turn things around in this country, both spiritually and socially, politically? How do we turn things around when that's the type of person that we're dealing with? Again, even within the church, far, far too often. I mean, talk about Gospel Coalition again. I think that's the very reason that they've been able to thrive and survive, is by creating those people that are clung to them by sheer willpower. There's nothing, no information that you could give these people to show them and prove to them that, yeah, the Gospel Coalition's probably not the greatest thing to follow. They put out a lot of questionable content that really shifts things in a negative direction. For, any good they do, there's all this bad. Well, they're not going to pay attention to the actual facts. They're going to cling on to them by sheer willpower because they've been told that they have intellectual reasons for following the Gospel Coalition, for believing what the Gospel Coalition says, for X, Y, and Z. They've been bought into this system. And now, again, they're by their willpower holding on. One of the things I will say, do not try to debate that kind of person. Do not do it. That is a losing proposition. The only thing you will be able to do is win. And by win, I mean score points with your side, not for your side, with your side. People that agree with you will look at you and go, man, you did great. The problem is you didn't win anyone over. So do not debate with these people, because in a post-truth society, in a society that's been turned, their will is turned against something, you will not win via argumentation. One thing I will say is I do think we are leaning more and more, as we get further and further away from the modernist era, we're moving more and more back to a sort of neutral state, if it were, where most people are emotional. That intellectual, people don't care as much about intellectualism anymore. New spirituality has taken hold. This neo-pagan idea, the I'm spiritual but not religious. Oh yeah, I'm really spiritually connected. Even just your normal person nowadays is willing to say that. In that case, I think we are moving back towards a correction. where we're going to lose that I'm intellectually justified. People are still going to say that, but they're going to shift back towards actually being emotionally driven and not this amalgamation of things that leads them to just be volitional. But what do we do in the meantime? How do we communicate with people? Because we don't want it to slip. We don't want things to slip into just this emotional mess, because we're seeing the sort of damage it's doing. We have to be honest. It's happening, in politically left-leaning circles, just rampant, but it's happening in politically right-leaning circles as well. It's not just rhinos anymore. Your average non-Christian Republican voter is just as intellectually confused, just as confused about truth as their leftist counterpart. Now, they just happen, thankfully, to agree with true conservatives on a lot of things, but that is slipping over time. So we've got to be out there actively fighting and standing up for truth. This is where the paradox comes in of this. We have to be out there actively fighting and standing for truth, presenting the truth, while also trying to appeal to these. I know everybody said appeal is a bad thing, but communicate with, not be appealing, but make an appeal to. Communicate with these post-truth people and get them back to solid ground. We're out there in a boat with a bullhorn trying to both convince people you're drowning right now. And everyone's in the water struggling and they're going, no, we're not. We're not drowning. Oh my goodness, what a bigot. So we're simultaneously saying that while throwing out life preservers and trying to catch people. Yeah, it's a complex balance that we're trying to do. But this really needs to be established. This really needs to be established before we can talk about some of the other details of responding to the social justice movement, the whole woke movement, whatever you want to call it, and defining exactly what that is, and then answering it, responding to it. We need to understand the type of people that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with post-truth people. And again, that does not mean that every single person you meet is going to be radically post-truth. It's radically just denying that truth exists and just purely going off whatever they think and want to be true. There's going to be degrees of that. Again, that's where you got to assess the person. And we need spiritual activism for the truth. We need political activism for the truth. Activism in society, agitating for what the truth is. At the same time, we need to be going out and trying to rescue these people from their own mixed up beliefs. I mean, and this is something we'll probably talk about at some other point, but the devil's done an amazing job of getting people to believe that love is hate and hate is love. He's just, I don't get how, able to 180 degree flip around people's view of everything from love to hate. People hate themselves, hate humanity, just to just an insane degree. And then they say, oh yeah, but it's love. No, hating is never love. How do you communicate with people like that? How do you communicate with people like that? And the problem is, I've given you details, information, things to work with. But when you're dealing with an amorphous enemy, this blob of beliefs it can manifest however it wants because it can just decide what it believes. There's no singular tactic I can give you that overcomes that. So again, we got to be able to go out there and declare the truth that example of the missionaries, it was good that they declared the truth repeatedly until it was the basic, the words were understood. Something else took, it took something else to unlock that, the meaning of it. So we got to go out there. We got to declare the truth in words clearly. And then we got to look at the person. We got to see, okay, well, what's the key to take you from someone who denies that truth even exists to someone that is unlocked to what the meaning of these words are. Now, just because they can understand the meanings of the word does not mean they're going to get saved. Does not mean they're going to change their beliefs to agree with you. It does not mean they're going to admit that men cannot be women. It doesn't mean any of that. But at least you've got them to a point where they are understanding what you mean. You've been successful in communication. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. I really do. I want to know how this conversation has been sparking your thought process. I want to hear it. Because this is going to take discussions in order to really refine out how to communicate with these post-truth people. I've given you some ideas, but that's not going to be everything. It's not going to be everything. So I really do want to hear your thoughts on this. Let's start a little bit of a conversation. On interactions. And the goal of an interaction, again, is not did I win the person to my position, and it's not did I win for my side. The goal is, now that's kind of a sneaky thing because winning for our side would be, in evangelism in particular, it would be getting them, seeing them saved. But far too often nowadays, winning for my side means I scored points. Look at me. I shut this person down. Look, we're trying to communicate with people, and that's the goal. Can we be successful in communication with people? I know that the online world has been terrible, has really demolished the idea that success in communication is measured by can you transmit an idea from one person to another? And now it's just, can I post something that appeals to my side and that scores victory points? So I want to hear your thoughts. How have you struggled or seen success in communicating with these post-truth people? What kind of things have you seen in your own church when it comes to post-truth people? How are you having mercy on those Christians and trying to build them up? Do you have any thoughts after this conversation about how you're going to try and communicate better with post-truth people? Now, this isn't the end. We're going to be talking more about concepts that build off of this, tactics. But I think for the moment, this is enough to get the ball rolling. And that's the thing I want to do. I wanted this to be the start of your journey thinking about this, really realizing what it means that someone is postmodern, what it means that someone believes in their truth, what it means that they have these ideas about how the world works. And go, okay, well, yeah, that's going to affect successful communication. I can say the words. I can say, that cat is brown. And have them look at me, understand every word I just said, but look at it and go, huh, look at fuzzy creature. What color cat creature be? Like I just said, cat is the cat's brown. And why are you talking so weird? How do you get people? Yeah, they probably wouldn't even admit it's a cat. Look, it's fur self. I wonder what animal fur self identifies as. How? You might think it's a funny joke. No, there are people that behave that way. How do you communicate? How do you then communicate with that person if they just look at you and what you said, just saying the cat is brown makes no sense to them? How do you communicate with them? How do you overcome that to at least get them to understand what you're saying? Again, this is a process, a conversation, and it's a concept we're going to be building upon. We're going to be answering this question more and more as we go down the line, as we talk more about truth, as we talk, I got something I want to talk about. Might be the next one of these we do, but it's going to be artificial truth. If you think you have any idea what that means, you probably don't, because I'm essentially making up the term. But it's going to be a fun conversation. So I hope to see you in the next episode of the TLDR Christianity podcast. Now, if this has been helpful to you, please do those things like, share, subscribe. And I'm always going to say it. I don't care if you just share it out there in the ether. If it's been helpful to you and you have a friend that you go, man, this would be helpful for that person specifically, that's who I'd rather you share it with. I'd rather you go to someone and say, hey, because I know you, because of this conversation we had, this might be helpful to you. This might be helpful. I want this to be an effective, useful resource, not just something broadly thrown out there. So whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. But again, let me know your thoughts. I'd really like to get a little bit of a discussion going. I like to know that you are thinking about this. And let me know if you think this is going to be a useful series, building off of ideas like this to help us to understand, have a foundation for understanding those we disagree with, how to interact in the fights that we find ourselves in, and just getting that sort of foundation work. Let me know if this has been useful. Let me know if you liked. I didn't have like a clear division point when I kind of transferred to just more generic conversation as opposed to trying kind of defining things. It just flowed. So I don't think I necessarily hit exactly what I meant by that, but let me know your thoughts. Thank you for joining me in this episode of the TLDR Christianity podcast. Again, if you did find it useful and you are up for supporting the work that I'm doing, you can give to the Patreon or the Give Send Go. They are linked below. But if this is ever something that you are placing financially or authority, intellectual, religious, just in any sort of sense, authoritatively above your primary responsibilities, if you're ever listening to your pastor and going, well, Kyle said, block the podcast. Don't just turn it off, just block it. If you're ever like, man, I really like the TLDR Christianity podcast, and I'm going to give some money to it, but you didn't put money into the offering on Sunday. No. I do not want that. Take that money, go. Put it in an offering plate for your church. It really is. If you've done everything else and you feel like contributing, you can. You can also give me feedback. Love feedback. But thank you for being here. Remember, God is good, so go and glorify his name.